Adobe just announced a bunch of new updates to their Creative Cloud apps at their annual Adobe Max conference. And in this video, we're going to focus on Lightroom, and specifically, we're going to look at the new masking tools. Well, they're kind of new. Some of the stuff is new, some of the stuff you've seen, but the way you now can use these tools, that's what's really special. And so let's just dive right in over here. And I've got Lightroom open. You can see here, this is Lightroom Classic. I've got 3 images. And here's the fun thing about this is that for this video and all 3 of these photos, we're pretty much only going to edit using the masking tools. We're not going to do any global edits. Maybe in one of the images after we use the masking tools, I might apply some global edits just to show you what that looks like after you do selective edits. So we'll start with this photo here. Now, you'll notice under the develop module over here, right below the histogram, there are 4 icons. And the one that I'm going to focus on is this 4th one called masking. So let's click on that, and you'll notice right away that there is this new masking panel. And right off the bat, you'll see that there are 2 new options. This is really some cool stuff here. So now you can use AI to automatically select the subject and the sky in your photo and then make the localized adjustments to whatever Lightroom thinks is the subject or the sky. And then the rest of them here are things that you're used to. So the brush, adjustment brush, the linear gradient, the radial gradient, and then of course, color range, luminance range, and depth range if your photo has a Z map to it. So something like if you have an iPhone, for example, and you use the portrait mode, you should be able to use the depth range mask over here. But we're not going to touch that. We're going to focus on creative ways to use the select subject and select sky features. So we have this photo here of this couple in this field. And just to show you right off the bat what happens when you go to select subject. So I'm going to click it, and automatically, this is just super impressive. And there are a few things I want to show you about what happens once you create a selection, which is now called a mask. The first thing you'll notice is that the checkbox to show overlay is active, so you can see the mask here, and you have a few options in terms of how to visualize that mask. You have the color overlay, you have color overlay on black and white, image on black and white, image on black, which really shows just how impressive that mask is actually, image on white, and then white on black. Now, for the most part, I'm going to work on the color overlay, and you have this little color swatch here, which brings up a familiar color picker. So you can choose, any color you want, as well as the opacity of that color, just to get a better idea of where the mask is being applied. So I have it on this kind of yellowy color because it's easier for me to see that. And so the way that I've been using this, and I've been using this actually for, it's been almost a few months now as a beta tester, I always have the color overlay on while I'm making the selection, just to make sure that the selection is good. And then once the selection is good, then I'll disable it, and then I can actually start editing on it. But before I do any of that, what I have kind of the custom that I've started to follow is I'll click on the little ellipse over here, and I'll rename it, and I'll call this, I'll give it a descriptive name. So I'll say couple mask, just so that I know. And the reason why is because you can actually now work with multiple masks. Before this version of Lightroom, you could have multiple adjustment brushes or gradient masks, but they would kind of all be on the same layer. It'd be hard to identify one from the other. So here now we can kind of have this couple mask here, and I know that this is that mask. So when I have this selected, I'm working on the couple. And so now, let's say I wanted to, with this couple, maybe open up the exposure just a little bit and add some contrast, and maybe drop the clarity so it's not as sharp, and maybe up the highlights just a bit, and even cool them off because they look a little warm. So I'm just slightly adjusting the white balance temperature slider. So you can see here, if we click on the little eye icon, that'll kind of show and hide, as you would probably be familiar with by now, but it's only affecting them. And you also have this little mask icon that's if you're using Photoshop, you're definitely familiar with that icon, that mask icon. So that's cool here. So again, right now, the most impressive part of this is just how well Lightroom identified the subjects, both of them, not just one, both of them, and that mask was really clean. So that's really cool. Now let's look at another way to use masks here, and that is by adding and subtracting. So I'm gonna go ahead here and click on this create new mask button. And instead of selecting anything here with a subject or a sky, I'm just gonna go to the linear gradient and I'm gonna drag upward. And basically what I wanna do with this mask is I want to edit the background behind the couple. So I'm gonna take this and I'm just gonna make sure that here, let me move this up so that the whole thing is basically highlighted. Actually, let me go ahead here and zoom out and bring this out even more. Now, here's the one of the things that annoys me about this masking. Hopefully they'll fix it. Is you saw me zoom out and I can zoom in. I'm just using the command plus and minus, but I can't, if I click, I can't do anything in terms of like zooming in and out. In order to do that, you have to exit out of the mask. And now you can kind of zoom in and out as normal. So that's just something to remember. You can always use them, again, the command or control plus and minus, but you have to exit out of masking to click to zoom. All right, so going back to this, you can see here that we have the entire image now basically masked. And just like I mentioned before, the first thing I want to do is rename this, and I'm gonna call this background mask. And I'll click OK. Now here's the cool part. Again, I wanna adjust everything except for the couple. I don't want the couple to be adjusted here. So what I'm gonna do is click on this subtract button, and I'm gonna select subject. And just how awesome is that, the way it just punches the couple out? So basically the background is now only the only thing that's going to be masked or adjusted when I start manipulating these sliders. But let's take it a step further. Let's say I only want, let me turn off the overlay. Let's say I only want the sky, or rather I only want the foliage. I don't want the sky. So let's turn this overlay back on. I'm going to click subtract again, and I'm going to go to this color range. And this is something that you should be familiar with. We had this before. And so I'm going to click and I'm going to make a little selection like this, and boom, it just automatically gets rid of the sky. So really now only the foliage is selected. So here, if I want to bring attention to the couple, what I can do is, and actually really quickly, you see these icons here, these indicate the different parts of the mask. If you don't want to see them, press the H key and that'll hide them or reveal them. So I'm going to hide them, and then I'm going to take the exposure slider. I'm going to drop that down just a little bit. And then I'm also going to warm it because I want that to be a little bit warmer. Let's drop that exposure just a little bit more. Let's drop the highlights a little bit. Let's add a little bit of texture and clarity. And you can see now how the couple is really popping off of the background. And we didn't have to worry about the sky itself. The sky is fine. I don't want to touch the sky, but I wanted to just kind of adjust everything else. And so you can see here, if we just toggle the background mask, how awesome that is. And then if you want to turn off all the masks, you just click on this switch right here, and that'll turn off all of the masks. And so you can see what we were able to do here with just localized masking. And again, the big thing, well, there are two big things here. There is the ability to automatically select the subject or the sky, but then also how you kind of manipulate your other selections using those auto subject and sky selections. So by adding or subtracting that. So I think that's super powerful. All right, so let's go back to grid view here. We'll go to the next image. And just like before, we'll go to the develop module, and we're going to click on the masking button. Now this time I'm going to click on the select sky option here. And you can see that it does a really great job. And just like before, let's go ahead and we will rename this to sky mask. And again, I like to rename because if you do start working with multiple mask layers, which I guess you can kind of look at these as layers, it helps identify what's what. So by renaming it, I know that this is the sky mask, even though that it shows below it what that mask is composed of. So this mask currently is composed of automatically this sky selection. So we can turn off the overlay here. Now, what I'll do is I'll just, again, maybe cool off that sky just a little bit, maybe drop the exposure just a tiny bit. And let's add some dehaze to give it that kind of polarizer look, like we were using a circular polarizer. Let's open up the highlights, and it's just looking great. I mean, let's toggle that mask. See how it's just kind of flat, but now it looks really nice. We didn't have to worry about, doing a gradient filter and then having to use the erase brush to kind of, get rid of the horizon. The mask did it automatically. So now let's start working on the two other components of this photo. The first is the subject, and the second is the actual kind of background. So just like before, we're going to go to create new mask, and I'm going to click on select subject. We'll see how Lightroom does. And I mean, very impressive. It's not perfect, so don't expect absolute perfection. For example, I can see here that the wisps of hair here are not selected, but I mean, look over here in between her arm and her torso. That was not selected. That's something that typically happens with a mask, is that's selected and you have to go through. But again, we can zoom in and you can see that just a little bit was selected here. And if you want, you can go ahead here. So this is let me show you how you can use the kind of adjustment brush to remove components of the mask. We'll go to subtract here, and then we're going to select brush. And I've got, here are the brush properties, and I want to make sure that auto mask is turned on. And so we're automatically in erase mode, and I'm just kind of going here and just cleaning that up. So again, all in all, it's fine. Again, we now have to click out to get back to our normal zoom, but that's okay. And let's rename this, and we will call this person mask. And now we have that identified. And remember, you have to click on that mask to activate it. Also, one of the things that I want to mention is you'll notice there is a little bar over here. You can take it to kind of adjust the mask panel. There's this top bar here where you can actually remove the panel and put it out kind of floating on your image. Now, I'm not personally a fan of that. I like kind of having it parked over here. So just so you know that there is some kind of customization in terms of how you work with that masking panel. So again, let's expand this here. And so you can see here we have our person mask. We use the subject selection, and then we also used the erase or subtract with the brush. So that's kind of how you interpret these two kind of layers under the mask. Now that we have our selection, let's disable the overlay here. And what I'm going to do is let's kind of open up the exposure just a little bit. Let's add some contrast and some clarity. And let's also kind of warm her up just a tiny bit. And let's drop the shadows. It looks like the shadows are kind of overexposed. So let's bring some of those shadows back. And that's looking good here. Let's see, just kind of tightened it up a little bit, made her pop a bit more. And so now we're going to work on the background. So we did the sky, we did the subject. Now let's do everything around her. So I'm going to click on the create new mask button here. We're going to go to the linear gradient. And just like before, let's go ahead and we will drag up to right around here, just so that we have everything here in terms of the foreground and kind of the mountains in the background. Now, just like before, this is going to be fun. Let's go ahead and subtract the subject. And so, boom, subject gets removed. But let's also remove the sky, because you can see here that we spilled over into the sky a bit. So we will go to subtract and select sky. And so that's going to remove the sky. Now we have this beautiful, clean mask of the background, which is great. So we will go ahead here, rename this to background mask, and click OK, and disable the overlay. And so now what we can do is let's drop the exposure just a little bit so that with that, the subject really pops off the screen. Let's warm it up. Let's also, we can also have some fun with the hue slider. So here you can see if I drag left and right, how it's adjusting that whole entire area. And so I'm going to drag it a little bit towards the magenta right around here. Let's add some saturation, and let's add some sharpness, some clarity, and some texture. And so that's looking pretty awesome. Like, let's disable that. See how it just kind of looks flat? And then we were able to just affect that background. And then to see the whole entire image with all three of those masks off, that was the original. And you see just how much better it looks. And we haven't done a single global adjustment yet. Like now we can go ahead, if you're done with the masks, and we have, you can see our three masks here, we could turn that off. And now you can do things like go and add a post-crop vignette, for example, make some global tonal adjustments with like maybe an S curve. And then you have some fun here. So that's, our global adjustments. But again, we were able to make the bulk of our edits with the masking tool, which I think is really, really cool. So let's go to our third and final photo here. So I took this at a tulip field a few years ago, and we're going to basically have some fun and do the same thing, edit with masking. So we'll activate the masking panel, and just like before, we will select subject, and Lightroom selects the hot air balloon, which is exactly what I want. And it does a really good job. Like that is such a clean mask. I don't have to worry about anything here. And so let's go ahead and disable that overlay. Let's open up the exposure. Let's open up the shadows a little bit. And this time, just like before, I'm going to use the hue slider. And this is also really fun, just kind of seeing the way it's almost like this weird kaleidoscope effect. But I'm going to bring it just a little bit towards magenta again. We'll add a little bit of clarity just to make that pop. A little bit of dehaze, just a tiny bit. A little bit of contrast. And you can see here, we need to rename this actually. We'll call this hot air balloon mask. And we can toggle that so you can see just how easy that was. Now, let's move on to the sky. And the sky can be a bit complicated because we also want to make sure that we are adjusting for the sky through all these branches. So I'm going to go to create new mask and select sky. And it does a pretty good job of selecting the sky, but we want to make sure that we get through the branches. So I'm going to zoom in here. And what I want to do is now we're going to add. So every time so far, we've been using these two buttons. I was using subtract, but this time we're going to add. And I'm going to go and select a luminance range here. And I'm going to click over here. And boom, you can see that it does this great job of selecting the rest of the sky. So let's exit out of mask for a second so we can zoom out. We'll go back here and let's rename this to sky mask. And we will go back to that luminance range here. And so you can see here, if I press and hold on the Option key or Alt key while dragging, you can see exactly what that luminance range is kind of attacking. And so right around here is what we want. And you can see that now that the mask is pretty much going through every part of the branches, including on the left here. So what I can also do is it's also getting, I think, these tulips. And so I can go to subtract here and I'll just select a brush and let me make a big brush size and just make sure that it's not actually, we're not adjusting the tulips here. Okay, cool. So we're done here. Now we can go ahead and with the sky mask selected, let's turn off the overlay. And let's say I want to go ahead and maybe add some dehaze to bring out some definition in that sky. And I want to maybe warm it up because this was at sunrise. So I want to give it a little bit of warmth over here. Let's maybe make it a little bit darker, add some contrast, can give it a little bit of a moody look to it. And then let's say I want to add just a little bit of a cooler temperature to the top, just a tiny bit. So what I will do is I will click on a new mask and we're going to go to a linear gradient. I'm going to drag down here, just around here. Let's press H and make sure that we have a really soft edge and bring that mask up. So right around here, and let's rotate it so that's straight. So right there is what I want. Let's hide that. And again, so now the problem with the gradient tool is that it spills over everything, including the hot air balloon. I don't want that. I just want it to be on the sky. So what I can do is, again, go to subtract and select subject rather, and it will remove the hot air balloon from the selection. And so I can rename this to top of sky mask, and let's turn off that overlay. And I'm just going to add a tiny bit of this kind of cooler tone, just so that it looks like it's going from a cooler tone up on top to slightly warmer because the sun was lower at the horizon. So there's that. And you can see here, just a very subtle, kind of separates the sky a little bit. And we can go here to the sky mask and see that, how we brought out that really nice detail, and then the hot air balloon. And so with the masks done here, we're pretty much done with the masks. Actually, no, there's one more I want to do. I want to kind of make the foreground pop a little bit more. So this one's a bit more straightforward. I'm going to add a new linear gradient just for this foreground here, right to there. I don't think we really even need to do any addition or subtraction. We'll turn off the overlay. I'm going to add a little bit of brightness, add some clarity, see how the tulips pop. Definitely add some saturation because I want that color to pop too, and some contrast. And so you can see here, let's rename this to tulips mask. Okay, cool. And now we can kind of see how they pop really nicely. And so now that we've made these localized adjustments, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the masking tool, and we can go ahead and make global adjustments if we want. So again, just like before, one of the things I typically like to do is add an S curve to add some really nice kind of controlled contrast here, and maybe a vignette. So there we go. Let's see how that vignette looks. Yeah, that looks good. All right, so, and then just like before, let's go back to the masks and we can see all of the masks. So imagine we didn't have the mask adjustments. You see how, I mean, what the masks do, it's just really cool. And so those are the new masking tools in Lightroom. I think it's awesome the way Adobe has kind of reimagined the way that we use masking tools like the adjustment brush and the linear gradient and the radial gradient tools. It's just one of those things that I never really thought about whether it can be improved, but it clearly has. More importantly, the auto sky and auto subject selection and the way that you are able to interact with them by adding and subtracting. I think that's going to be one of the most powerful ways that users are going to use this new masking tool. So I'm very excited to see how you guys use it. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And I mentioned the tone curve a few times in this video. I've got another video all about the tone curve, so I highly recommend you check it out. And if you like what you see, be sure to subscribe and click on the bell icon to get notified for all new videos. I'll see you on the next one, everyone.